Welcome to video number 10, the political spectrum. The world has gone through a lot of changes in the 240 plus years since the founding of this nation. But the same ideological battle has been fought over and over again and is being fought right now. The king has been substituted by the faceless, anonymous power of the state. The two camps are as follows, and you can reduce every political struggle to these two diametrically opposing worldviews. The side that believes that individual human beings can rule themselves. That would be the side of the founders. And the side of those who believe in collectivism, a top-down, centralized, managed society. They believe that an elite class of brilliant people should dictate how the ignorant masses live their lives. To them, the state as an abstract entity is above the individual. All rights come from the state. They are given by the state and can be changed or taken away according to what is considered the best for the collective well-being. The ruling class gets to decide what's best for the collective, based on a concept of need as the measuring stick. The following is a fundamental axiom of this ideology. Quote, "From each according to his ability, to each according to his need." Karl Marx. This totalitarian ideology has been around throughout the history of humanity. The most recent examples are numerous. They include communism, socialism, fascism, Nazism, progressivism, and the modern version of liberalism. This new liberalism is not the classical liberalism of the founders. You can expand on this by looking up classical liberalism. If we could wake up the founders right now, they would immediately recognize all these ideologies as belonging to the same category. They would put them under the general umbrella of tyranny. This is the perfect place to correct a huge misconception that has found its way into today's mainstream of political definitions. If we would ask those founders we just woke up earlier to describe the system of categories and the political spectrum they used in their time to explain the different forms of government, their version would be very different than the version commonly accepted today. In their worldview, which is still applicable and absolutely valid today, the political spectrum runs from monarchy through anarchy. Now this gets a little technical and there are a lot of terms that have to be defined. First of all, the modern political concepts of left and right would have been completely meaningless to them. And we should consider them meaningless today. Now to avoid confusion, instead of going left to right, let's picture the political spectrum in a vertical line instead. Starting at the top, the founders would list the following forms of government in the following order. Now, they would base this order according to the amount of individual liberty afforded to the people living under each system. From no freedom at all to complete freedom. They would put them in this order. First, monarchy. Second, oligarchy. Third, democracy. Four, representative republic. And fifth, anarchy. Now, let's define the terms. Monarchy is absolute power concentrated in the figure of the monarch, whatever you might call them, king, emperor, pharaoh, etc. There's no innate individual liberties or rights, just the ones granted by the ruler. Oligarchy. The power is concentrated in the hands of an elite, nobles, aristocracy. There's no liberty for the bulk of society, only for the elites. Democracy. The power of the simple majority, which is equivalent to mob rule. Minorities are powerless. Representative republic. Everybody under the rule of law, no one above the law. Maximum individual liberties and rights. Minimum necessary amount of governmental power to protect those liberties and rights. And lastly, anarchy. Complete chaos, no government, no law, social and political structures disintegrate. Now, we can further simplify this list. or condense it, because pure monarchy does not really exist. The monarch may be the visible head of the state, but there's always an oligarchy actually running the show. There's always a support system, an elite class that keeps the rest of the population under control and shares power with the king. In fact, they act as a counterbalance. They use the military or the standing army, which is the terminology more familiar with the founding fathers. That army always plays an important oppressive role in these systems. Anarchy, on the other end, is not really a viable, stable, long-term form of government. It is a transition from one form to another. Many times it is the product of violent revolution and a new form of government emerges at the other end. Democracy, in pure direct form, where the simple majority, 51%, rules in a direct vote and the other 49% is shut down, never lasts either. It has a tendency to self-destruct. This is a good place to introduce a fact which seems to have been lost in the historical limbo. The United States of America is not a democracy. It is a representative republic. There are very important differences associated with this distinction. We use the term democratic process, and we use that process to elect representatives. And they, the representatives, use it to vote on legislation. That's about it. The word democracy does not appear even once in the text of the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence. I believe it does not appear in any of the state constitutions either. In fact, you can find many strong arguments among the founding fathers' writings against the establishment of a democracy instead of a republic. Again, you have to do your own research. Now here is an example. Quote, "It had been observed that a pure democracy, if it were practicable, would be the most perfect government. Experience had proved that no position is more false than this. The ancient democracies in which the people themselves deliberated never possessed one good feature of government. Their very character was tyranny, their figure deformity." Alexander Hamilton, June 21st, 1788. I think the reason the terminology is widely used today, especially by politicians, stems from the fact that there is a strong bias in public culture and the so-called mainstream media. They rather use the word democracy, which is associated with the Democratic Party, than the term republic, which is associated with the Republican Party. By the way, the Republican Party was created to reaffirm the principles of the representative republic, which were under attack already in the late 1800s. Lincoln was the first presidential candidate of the new Republican Party. But I digressed. Going back to the political spectrum, we really end up with only two basic ideologies as the foundation of all the different forms of government, which can be considered stable and have been with us for a long time. The predominant one throughout history has been oligarchy/tyranny in all its different forms, both old and modern. We can use the broad term totalitarian regimes. The other, which is very rare, is representative republic. When we move up to the historical times closer to our own, totalitarian regimes, which are always oligarchies, present themselves in the following forms: communism, socialism, fascism, Nazism, and military dictatorships. Progressivism and today's liberalism are just a rebranding of socialism. The Founding Fathers would most likely classify all these forms under tyranny, as we mentioned earlier. If you're paying attention, you may have noticed that I have placed communism/socialism and fascism/Nazism in the same category. Now, this contradicts the widely accepted concept of the left and the right as the two opposites of the political spectrum. Now, before you start your conversation in your head, let me explain. Let's stick to this vertical spectrum. At the top, we have complete government control of the means of production, of property, and of the lives of every individual citizen. No personal liberty. At the bottom of the vertical spectrum, we have anarchy. No government, complete disintegration of all political and social structures. Chaos. When you look at it from this perspective, doesn't it make perfect sense to put all totalitarian ideologies on the same side or at the top? When you analyze them closely, you're able to see the parallels and similarities between socialism and communism and Nazism and fascism. There are no fundamental differences between them. They only vary in degree and on the emphasis they put on either the universality of the ideology in the case of socialism and communism, or nationalism in the case of Nazis and fascists. You probably never consider it in this way. Please bear with me. Let's agree that in the vertical yardstick we have been using, what is being measured is the amount of respect, protection given to the following markers: individual liberty, human rights, private property, rule of law, freedom of the press, freedom of assembly, freedom to practice the religion of your choosing, rights of civilians to bear arms, free market economy. All these parameters can be said to be compromised in different degrees when we deviate from the structure of a true representative republic. From least to most restrictive, we can place these forms of government in the following order. Socialism. In its present form, it's mixed in and coexists in varying degrees with capitalism. China is a good example of it today. Western Europe, South America, some of the former Soviet satellites, and Canada are some examples too. Remember, progressivism and today's liberalism are just different names for the same basic ideology. It is under these new names that socialists and communist concepts have found a very strong foothold in the so-called mainstream of American politics. This hybrid mixture of free market capitalism and socialism/communist ideologies is equivalent to putting sugar or sand on the gas tank of your car and expecting it to work properly. Now, fascism, born in Italy under Mussolini between World War I and World War II, it is characterized by a very strong state control of the private sector, keeping the appearance on paper of private ownership. Great emphasis is put on nationalism. Nazism, which literally means National Socialism, has a special emphasis on nationalism too. There's a higher state control of private sector industries, the nationalization of key components of the infrastructure and means of production, such as transportation and weapons manufacturing, control of the press, education, and religion. Actually, religion is co-opted by the state in Nazism. In the beginning, to help it propagate its ideology and make it more palatable. Now, communism. That's a complete state control, no private industry or property rights, no human rights, no freedom of religion, in some complete abolition of liberty in any of its manifestation. The emphasis, though, is more on the international workers' movement. This last detail is probably the main difference between communism and the other totalitarian ideologies. Now, do you realize how, when viewed from this perspective, which is, as we said earlier, the one the Founding Fathers had, the current way of expressing the political spectrum in terms of left and right becomes illogical, irrelevant? How can you justify placing communism, socialism on the left and fascism and Nazism on the right, when, as we can see, common sense tells you that they are the same and only vary in a degree with which they assault the personal liberties and rights of the individuals who live under them, and in the degree of international character they possess. Communism is international, Nazism is nationalist. If you want proof, study the historical facts regarding the relationship between Hitler and Stalin in the times immediately preceding World War II. They were buddies and signed treaties on how they were going to divide the world between them. Even Hitler acknowledged the fact that the red in the Nazi flag is the same red on the hammer and sickle flag of the Soviet Union. It was only when Stalin started to notice that Hitler was gaining more and more power that he decided to switch sides and fight against Germany alongside Britain and the United States. I'll see you next one.